Well, the issue came up in Parliament today where President Cyril Ramaphosa was answering questions. It was raised, not as a part of the prepared set of questions at least. The DA leader, John Steenhuisen, asking President Ramaphosa to address this. The President, in response, told Parliament that the issue is being looked into.
We are all aware of the news that we all became aware of the Lady R, and that whole matter, Honorable Steenhuisen, is being looked into. No, it isn't. It's being looked into, and whilst the process continues, I want you to allow that process to continue to reach its fruition. I know that you are so keen. You are so keen and you are so interested in knowing exactly what happened. The matter is being looked into, and in time we'll be able to speak about it.
Let's get the view now of Wits University's African Center for the Study of United States Director, Professor Gilbert Khadiagala. Very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you for your time. Is any of what's now been alleged by the Americans plausible? The idea that South Africa would move away from a public non-aligned statement to basically supplying arms to a country involved in active warfare?
It is difficult for me to judge whether that statement is plausible, but what I can at least surmise is that the language of the ambassador was a fairly tough language. And the statements that he made seem to be very well prepared. And so my thinking would be really to say that there may be evidence that is emerging that the ambassador is relying on. And I don't think he could come up with such statements, especially at this moment in time, when there wasn't a sense of credibility to the statement. And so that's, I think, what I can say on that point.
He says he would bet his life on what he said today as far as South Africa supplying arms to Russia to aid in the war effort or the invasion of Ukraine by Moscow. But even U.S. intelligence has failed in the past. So I wonder how much of the burden of proof now falls on the Americans. For example, you could easily go back 20 years ago and say when Americans invaded Iraq, they went in there with intelligence, but weapons of mass destruction were actually never found.
It would be very difficult, from my understanding, is that they would not be able to share that kind of intelligence publicly. They probably, I think if you listen to the Clayton Maniela was saying that they have been talking about the issues with the Americans, and the agreement was that there should be no mega diplomacy around this issue. So I think if the discussion is ongoing, then maybe the South African government at some point would have to ask through the different diplomatic channels for the evidence that the ambassador is alluding to. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that this is the kind of information that would be released to the public.
So, Clayton Maniela, in a tweet today, said basically that there had been, as you were saying, conversation between the two countries, basically, and he says that in the agreed approach, megaphone diplomacy was not agreed. Megaphone diplomacy is basically a shot at the U.S. So are they now officially going to start quarreling in public? And if they do, who's got more at stake?
Yeah, I think that the ambassador may have been prompted, if there have been discussions, the ambassador may have been prompted by probably the laxity of the South African government to come clean on this matter. I don't think he would have called a press conference to make this kind of statements without, I think, a sense of frustration on the South African part. So I suspect this is a way to prompt the government to come clean and actually declare whether this matter is actually correct or not.
Ambassador Briggs says they're not bullying South Africa, but would that not be bullying if they've gone public with this information, these allegations, precisely to put pressure on Pretoria?
I think there is a sense to which they want to put pressure on Pretoria to come clean on this matter. The language of the ambassador, as I said, may have been harsh, may have been firm, but my thinking is that it could have been prompted by other reasons. So we'll need to see how it evolves. But I think the other component of the story is how the president responds in Parliament when he's asked on this matter. And I think the explanation about this matter is going to be investigated or looked into is a kind of a surprising statement, because if there have been ongoing discussions, there should have been some level of preparedness on his part on responding to the opposition leader on this very matter. So I don't think he was caught unaware if there are diplomatic negotiations. But the other theory could be you're looking at a very deeply divided government in South Africa, and therefore the president may not even have that information.
But if that were true, on the second theory, that itself would be damaging to South Africa, that weapons would have allegedly moved out of the country to go to Russia, which is waging war in on its neighbor's territory. But on the previous one as well, would it have been unfair to expect the president to be able to give a full, detailed answer on the spot about this issue? Because on the U.S. account, this happened 6 months ago, so there should have been enough information sharing on it already.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the president was caught unawares because he probably wasn't ready to give a full response. So that's understandable. He wasn't ready to give a full response. But I'm just saying that the response was a bit, it suggested that he may not even have a lot of information on this matter. But on the theory that there has been ongoing negotiations between the U.S. and South Africa on this very matter, because there have been a lot of rumors in the press about this ship from the time it docked in Simontown 6 months ago. So it's an issue that has been there, but we really don't know the details as a public. But you would expect that the government should have at least a very quick response on this matter, rather than, I think, the president starting to look like he's vacillating around that very matter with an investigation. We don't know how long this investigation is going to take.
Would it be?
And what is the impact of that statement that will come from the government? Will it be denial, or I don't know. So we have to really wait and see.
Briefly, Professor Khadiagala, would this be a big enough issue for the Americans to basically, shall we say, punish South Africa by withdrawing investment, i.e. AGOA and PEPFAR?
You see, there have been moves in Congress since about February this year to punish South Africa. In fact, the bill specifically says that South Africa should be punished for a number of reasons, including the Ukraine issue, including the naval exercises between China and Russia. So this has been a story that has been developing. It's possible, therefore, that if Congress is already thinking about this very same issue, it will be very difficult for the government in the U.S., for instance, to, in fact, avoid the very issue that is now on the table of Congress. So I think the consequences may be significant, because that bill is just being discussed. It hasn't been passed. But if it's passed, it means the president of the U.S. will have to implement those measures, which may not be good for South Africa.
Professor Gilbert Khadiagala, a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.